Probably the most important state visit of this political season. Trump finally made it to Beijing with his business captains and met with Xi Jinping. As always, everything seems great for Trump. Everything's wonderful. He likes it all. But as always, see very little of what actually remains in reality in the bottom line. We understand that Taiwan was the stumbling block there, and it seems a military deal between the United States of America and Taiwan has been gathering dust for a long time, which China, I'll remind you, considers its own. Taiwan doesn't think so. What did you notice during this visit? Initially, the framework was something like this. You give us Taiwan, and in exchange, we offer you business preferences, valuable resources, access to markets, and a whole range of economic perks.
Look, basically, it's all right there on the surface. So the first thing that caught my eye was that, of course, this meeting solved absolutely nothing. And both sides stood their ground, as they say. But on the other hand, it marks some kind of change of eras. And I had one association which I wrote about that it reminded me of the meeting between Gorbachev and Reagan in Reykjavik. And back then, few remember that, in fact, the meeting, in terms of formal indicators, ended in a total failure. Well, because they couldn't reach any serious agreement on any of the points between them. And yet there was a sense of some kind of breakthrough. I mean, they met, they talked, they shook hands, and life later showed that this feeling was correct. That is, not by formal indicators, not by these accounting calculations of who grabbed what for themselves, but based on these feelings, life went on, showing it was a breakthrough, and the era of warming began. We were first in Russian-American relations, and then the world began to change. Here, though, the spiral of history is turning the other way now. So, God forbid, I'm not talking about those analogies at all. I'm not talking about some new detente. And in general, the roles are completely different. But this feeling I had was that a new era of the world is truly beginning, in which two new and powerful superpowers are gradually forming. And these two nations will eventually hash out many important issues between themselves and around them, like satellites. There will be larger planets, smaller planets. Asteroids will orbit. Some previously large planets will turn into smaller ones, maybe crumble into asteroids, but it will all happen around them. For me, the main thing is really the feeling that this so-called G2 world, as they call it, is becoming more and more realistic. After this meeting, it looks even more tangible and real. And the second feeling is that, it's a bit like being in love. There is always one person who loves and another who allows themselves to be loved. Well, such a formula might be questionable, but from a practical standpoint, it's empirically quite accurate. So, in this new G2 formula, I have a very clear and growing sense that China is increasingly becoming the side that, in many ways, allows itself to be loved.
Um, to what extent does China itself, in principle, understand its role in the world now, and how ready is it for this, well, internal mental ideological leap, a shift to take the top spot?
Those are two diametrically different questions. I think China has understood its role in the world for the last 5,000 years. And this is in no way connected to the reality surrounding it. That is, it was divided there in an oppressed and humiliated colonial position, yet it still continued to understand its role in the world. You see, our self-esteem, to put it mildly, rarely depends on the assessment of others or our actual situation. If you have the self-image of a king, it doesn't matter if you're currently homeless and a penniless beggar, you'll still have the self-image of a king. Therefore, China has always viewed itself essentially as the center of the world. Nothing changes there. But as for whether it's ready for this role now, I think there's an interesting point. Everything is happening a bit sooner than China expected. I think that overall China had a fairly long-term and carefully considered program where it intended to ride into paradise, so to speak, on the backs of others. It needed some additional time in that old world, the world as it was, where it could continue to operate. Well, leverage, let's say, the intellectual and other resources of the West to its own advantage. And suddenly events start to unfold. It suddenly finds itself in a sort of house of suicides. where all its surrounding competing civilizations start shooting themselves, some in the foot, some in the head. And the first warning sign was Russia, which, strictly speaking, took a gun and shot itself, well, let's say above the hip, right? And the most interesting thing is that one of the Chinese newspapers back in 2022, it wrote directly that China is now observing and learning lessons. Their own from the fact that Russia is engaged in a civilizational self-shooting. Ah, well, and everyone has barely adjusted to this situation and somehow got used to this war, to Russia's new role, now already as such a dangerous dependent satellite. That is, on the one hand, an absolute satellite in terms of being such a dependent state, but at the same time stuffed with 6,000 nuclear warheads. Just as they managed to get used to it, suddenly America gets fully involved in the war in the Persian Gulf, and Trump, who was supposed to go to Beijing like a king, arrives, well, let's say in a very weak position and conducts negotiations from a weak position, which is unlikely to bring him any joy.